After your parachute opens, you'll need to fly and control that canopy back to the landing area. There are certain things that can make that a little bit more challenging, and one of those is the wind. When the parachute is traveling with the wind, or going in the same direction as the wind, it's called running downwind. If your parachute canopy has a forward speed of 20 miles an hour, and you are traveling with the wind that is going 10 miles an hour, then you have a forward speed across the ground of 30 miles an hour. It's like kayaking on a river. If you're paddling downstream, it's going to make it look like the shore is passing by you more quickly. But if you turn the kayak around and try and paddle upstream, the shore is not going to be moving very fast relative to your position. So let's turn the parachute around and fly into the wind. Your canopy still has a forward speed of 20 miles an hour, but now that forward speed is being counteracted by the wind that's coming toward you, and you only have a forward ground speed of 10 miles an hour. This is why it's better to land your parachute flying into the wind. If you land your parachute flying downwind, you're going to probably roll and slide on the ground, landing at about 20 to 30 miles an hour. If you land your parachute flying into the wind, you might have a forward speed of about 10 to 15 miles an hour. Now let's look at what happens if your canopy is flying perpendicular to the wind. In this case, your canopy is flying straight forward, but the wind is hitting you from the left or the right side. In the example at the bottom left, your canopy is flying forward, the wind is coming from your left side, and that's going to push you to the right across the ground. In order to correct this and fly in a straight line, you have to do what we call crabbing, where you turn into the wind just a little bit. In order to correct for the wind, you have to know what direction you are traveling across the ground. In order to do this, we're going to put our feet together in a V shape under parachute and look straight down in between our heels. By looking at the ground in between our heels, we can see that we are directly over the runway. As you fly your canopy, you will notice that you will either start to drift left of the runway, fly straight down the runway, or drift to the right of the runway. By sighting down in between your heels, you can see your track across the ground. In this situation, if your canopy is pointed straight north, right down the runway, but the wind is coming from your left side, it's going to push you to the right across the ground. So what will happen is, looking between your heels, you will notice that you start drifting to the right of the runway. In order to correct that, you're going to have to turn the canopy a little bit into the wind to start drifting back left over the runway. Now let's talk about the entire canopy descent. After your parachute opens, the first thing you're going to do is the three questions. Is it there? Is it square? Is it steerable? And how do we tell if it's steerable? By doing a controllability check. 2 flares, left, right, flare. After you've decided that you have a good canopy, the first thing we need to do is get an idea of where we are at. So we need to find the airport, and we'll talk about some landmarks that are around the airport to help you find it. Once you find the airport, you'll be able to narrow down and identify the playground area, which is an area that you can do some turns and play around in and still be able to make it back to the landing site. Then make sure you find the landing area and also determine at what point you need to start your landing pattern. Once you complete the landing pattern, we'll talk about flaring the canopy to land on the ground, and then also preparing for a parachute landing fall, which is the safest way to land a parachute. Here is an aerial of the Bolivar, Missouri airport. A couple of the largest landmarks to help you identify the airport are Highway 32, just north of the airport, and the golf course that is south of the airport. You should also be able to see the runway. If we zoom in a little bit more, you'll be able to see 2 large ponds and also what we call the blue building. The playground is a holding area that sets you up for your landing pattern. After your parachute opens, you're going to want to fly to the playground area. Once you get to the playground area, you can play around a little bit and do some turns and spins, but then keep an eye on your altimeter so that you can start working your way toward the starting point of the landing pattern. There are 3 different segments of a landing pattern: the downwind, base, and final. Each segment has a different starting altitude. So you start the downwind leg at 800 feet, turn in on your base at about 400 feet, and then turn in on final approach at 200 feet. Landing patterns are used to make sure that the flow of traffic is all in the same direction. This helps to reduce the risk of canopy collisions. At the airport you are jumping, they will tell you whether they want you to do a left-hand pattern or a right-hand pattern and make sure everybody landing in the same area is following the same pattern. The instructor will update the aerial and show you the planned landing pattern for the day. This aerial shows a left and right-hand landing pattern, and we can also see that the wind is coming out of the south. The left or right-hand landing pattern is used depending on which side of the runway you want to land on. We can also see the playground area that sets us up for the landing patterns. Your landing pattern will need to be adjusted based on how strong the winds are. On a normal wind day, we can see that we have a more normal shaped downwind base and final. In higher winds, we need to shorten the base and shorten the final because you're going to get less forward movement once you turn in on final. You will also have to crab more while you're on your base to prevent from getting pushed closer to the fence. Based on the winds, most drop zones have some lines that you cannot cross while you're flying under canopy. Usually these are barbed wire fences or power lines. If you end up crossing one of these lines, it can make it very difficult to fly into the wind to get back to your target landing area. This also increases the risk that you will land on those power lines or the fence.